if you think the Republicans and Democrats are hostile towards each other, you ain't seen nothing compared to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and their supporters, the Herodians. They make what happens in our Congress look like child play. In order to understand their differences, we have to remember that Israel was a conquered nation. The Romans had come in and conquered them in the name of the emperor. And many of the Jews had believed in an independent nation again. They wanted to be a nation, a mighty empire like they had been in the days of King David. But they couldn't have that underneath the Romans. So they fought and strove to try to overthrow the Romans and reestablish the nation of Israel. And anything to do with the Romans was considered idolatry or blasphemy to God, because it was giving authority to the Romans that they felt rightfully belonged to God. And so the Pharisees were very much against the temple tax and the occupation by Rome and anything to go along with that. Excuse me, the census tax. The temple tax was their own. So they were fighting against the Romans. The Sadducees were the opposite. The Sadducees were people who liked being under Roman control, because they said, look at all the good things Rome has brought to us. They spent a lot of money and built up our country. We now have a modern society. They had aqueducts, they had plumbing, they had so many things they didn't have before. And they thought, you know what? We're pretty peaceful under the Romans. We like it here. And the Herodians were a group of Jews who even went along with the king, because Caesar had set up a Jew to be the king of Israel, but he was really a puppet king, King Herod. And he represented Caesar, but he figured it would placate the Jews to let them know they had their own king. And of course, the Pharisees couldn't stand King Herod, but the Herodians were his supporter. So you can imagine that the Pharisees and the Herodians absolutely hated each other. And I don't think that's too strong a word to say. They hated each other. But the only thing they seemed to have in common was, as much as they hated each other, they hated Jesus even more. To both the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Herodians with them, Jesus was an obstacle to them. And they all wanted to see Jesus get taken out of the way. They wanted to get rid of him. And you know the old saying, my enemy's enemy is my friend? Well, that's what ultimately appealed to the Pharisees. And they figured, let's work with our enemies, the Herodians here, and together we can get Jesus killed and get him out of the way. And they came up with what they thought was the perfect plan, this census tax that Caesar had demanded. Now the Jews saw this as a travesty, as an absolute abuse to them, and the Romans saw it as legitimate government, proper, because, hey, we're spending all this money to build you up and giving you a great society. Well, your taxes are needed to cover it. And they figured either one, however Jesus responded to this question, whether or not it was lawful to pay the census tax, one of them could get him. Because if he said, no, it is unlawful, the Herodians could say, you see, Caesar, he's against you, and hand him over to Pilate to have him put to death. And if Jesus said, yes, you should pay the census tax, then the Pharisees could say, he's blaspheming God. He's giving the authority of Israel over to Caesar and not to God, and they could look to have him put to death. So they thought they had him trapped. And they come to Jesus, and they start by flattering him. Oh, teacher, we know you're a good man, an honest man. We don't care what people's opinion of you is, all that stuff. They're heaping on top of him, trying to put him off guard. And so, since you speak the truth, we ask you, should we pay the census tax or not? And Jesus sees right through it. He knows their hypocrisy, their false flattery, and he says to them, why are you trying to trip me up, you hypocrites? Show me the coin. So they showed him the Roman coin, and he says to them, whose picture is this, and whose inscription? They said, Caesar's. He says, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. And he completely dissolved the whole thing. They walked away dumbfounded. Jesus had once again walked out of one of their traps. And in his answer to them, Jesus sets up something very important for you and me today that has been important throughout the centuries, and especially us here today in the United States. Because he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar. In other words, Caesar represented political rule, civil law. And give to God what is God's. God, of course, being divine law. We are under 4 different levels of law in our lives. There's natural law, things that human beings just know one person doesn't do to another. It's ingrained within our nature as humans. Then there's civil law, the laws of the state. that whether it's the state of New York or Washington or whatever the country people find themselves living in, the laws of that particular government that bind us. Then there's church law, the laws that govern our worship and many of the other things, our fasting rules, for example, among many things that the church gives us. And then there's the highest law of all, divine law. And it is the divine law that teaches us about our moral life, our rights and wrongs, the things that form us in the image and likeness of Christ, the things that will lead us to heaven, and the things that would lead us away from our salvation. And that's the highest law of all. So yes, first, we are bound by civil law. We have a duty to respect the legitimate laws of our country, and even to love our country. So patriotism, the church teaches, and in the Catechism it mentions that patriotism and faithfulness in the political life is a virtue, and it is something we are expected to do. So by all means, we celebrate our civic holidays, Independence Day, and we rejoice in it. We have a wonderful day, that's perfectly fine. We even have prayers in the liturgy that the church has given us to celebrate Independence Day before the Lord. And the other laws of the state, we're bound by them. So we obey the driving laws, for example. We need a license to drive, and if we don't have one or we disobey certain laws, we'll go to prison for it, and that's legitimate. We pay our taxes. We obey every other law out there. And a lot of times the laws of the state and the laws of God don't collide with each other. And so obeying one also helps obey the other. And we can be perfectly proud of our country and not worry about it. And not think that we're doing anything wrong, that we're denying God. It's like in the ancient Roman Empire, a lot of people were forced, either worship the gods of Rome or you'll be considered unpatriotic. We don't have that problem. We can be American patriots and faithful Catholics at the same time. But every once in a while, a law between the state conflicts with the law of God. The law of Caesar, if you will, conflicts with the law of God. And to obey one would mean to disobey the other. Well, what do we do about that? In that situation, as in any situation anywhere, in any legal system, the statute is when a lower law and a higher law conflict, the higher law has priority, and we are absolved of our duty to obey the lower law in favor of the higher one. So whenever the state should pass a law that conflicts with God's law, well, we are absolved of our duty to follow the state law, and instead must follow the Lord's law, and never give to Caesar instead of to God. So it means, first of all, that we give to Caesar what is properly his, our obedience to him in law, but we give to God what properly belongs to him. So sometimes I think in our lives, maybe we find ourselves, if we were honest, realizing that we care more about Caesar than we do about God. We're adamant, gung-ho defenders of our political party, our political beliefs, and our politicians. But when it comes to God, we're mediocre at best. We really don't defend God. We really don't defend our faith. And we'll put bumper stickers all over our car for our particular politician. But if somebody asked you to wear even just a religious symbol in public, they would balk at that and say, oh no, that's something I have to keep private. Well, do we give to God what we give to Caesar? One of the things I've often seen that points it out to me is when we have hymns at Mass, a lot of times, there are some people who are very good and sing along the hymns nicely, but then there's others we know never will bother to sing, and they just don't even bother to attempt to sing the hymns, and the excuse they'll use is, well, I can't sing. Okay. But then if we have a political feast day or something like that, a holiday, and we decide to pray for our nation and sing America the Beautiful or God Bless America, what automatically happens? They raise the roof in song. God bless America. You feel it. The walls are shaking with the sound of the song. Why is that? Why are we willing to sing from our hearts for our country, but not for our God? Is it possible that we love our country more than we love God? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with loving our country, but if we have that great a love for the United States, which is fine, we must have a far greater love for God. Sometimes people will say, well, we don't know the hymns. Well, we sing Immaculate Mary. At Christmas time, we do Hark the Herald Angels Sing and Joy to the World. And everybody knows all the words to them, and they don't sing them. No, there's something different going on. And I've often wondered why it is. Why we are so proud of our country, or even our political party, but so afraid to mention our faith in public. So first, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but give to God what belongs to God, especially when those laws conflict. So many people are certainly very good. When we realize that the church or the state has set a law that conflicts with God, we say, well, I'm sorry. I will not follow that law. God says something greater. His law is higher than that. But sadly, there are others who don't do that. Some people, for whatever their reason, maybe they were born with it or whatever it may be, but they get into the mistake or the bad notion of my political party, right or wrong. And so they will do whatever the steering party of their particular party says is right, even if it conflicts with God's law. And they end up putting Caesar ahead of God, obeying the lower law instead of the higher law, sometimes making excuses for it, trying to decide, well, my religion is a personal thing, and what I believe privately has nothing to do with what I propose in my public policy, somehow thinking that by standing out and defending things that contradict God's law is somehow okay, which of course it isn't. And sometimes even getting to the point that when their politicians disagree with God, they actually, instead of turning to their politicians and saying, you know, you are wrong in that, because God teaches us that this is sinful, and you're saying, no, it's a good thing. Instead of turning to their political leaders and saying, trying to steer their political party into the right direction so that they will be in accord with God, no, instead they turn it around and try to tell God that he's got to change his teachings to be in line with their political party. They get it completely backwards. And that's most acute when we talk about a politician who claims to be a devout Catholic. And we see that so often in so many political battles for offices on many different levels throughout the nation. People who will say, I'm a devout Catholic, but then come out vocally against everything the church clearly teaches is revealed by God. And some of them were people that once held the teachings of the church very well and very fondly and obeyed the Lord out of love for him. But then they discovered when they ran for public office they would never get the nomination of their party if they espoused these beliefs, and so they betray them. They reject those beliefs so that they will get the support of their political party. Shame on them. Shame on them. Do they realize what they have done? They have, in effect, denied Christ so that they could get a political office. And Jesus says, anyone who denies me before man, I will deny before my heavenly Father. How sad that they given a choice between a political office and the salvation of their soul, they chose the political office. And I fear for those people when they die and stand in judgment, because they won't stand before the steering party of their political party, the steering platform. They will stand before Christ, and he will say, why did you deny me just so that you could win political office, no matter how high the office may be? And for us, even if we're not in politics, but voting for them, well, we have the same quandary. Certainly, it would be very easy if we had one politician who who was in line with everything the church teaches 100%, and the other one was 100% opposite what the church teaches. Well, it would be a no-brainer. We'd be easily able to say, of course, I have to vote for that person because that person is teaching everything I believe in. But a lot of times we don't have that option. We have a mixture. One person believes in this, and that, but not in the other things that the church teaches. And then there's another one who doesn't believe in this, and that, but does espouse the others. Rarely do we find somebody who is 100% in agreement with us on everything. And sometimes we have to make choices. We have to look at the two and say, well, this one says this, but this one says that. Which one should I vote for? That's where we have to go into prayer and ask the Lord to help us know which is a greater priority. Which one can we vote for? Sometimes it seems like we're voting for the lesser of two evils. We don't really like either candidate, but we figure one of them is going to win, so which one better represents what I believe in? Sometimes people will say, I can't honestly vote for either candidate, in whatever the office is. And if that's the case, I always say, vote. Even if you don't vote for them, leave that line open, or better, write yourself in. Write Mickey Mouse, write George Washington, but put something in there so that the government knows you didn't like either candidate for office, but at least you've had your say. When people don't vote, they have no right to complain about what's happening in Washington because they gave away their right. They just couldn't be bothered to have their voice be heard. So always vote. And the church teaches us that. We do have a duty to vote. It is our responsibility, and it would be sinful for us not to vote when we could vote simply because we don't like a candidate. So number one, be informed and vote. And secondly, I would recommend not just automatically following your political party. That because you were raised in this party or that, well, I'll vote for my party line. I can say that honestly because I'm not a member of any political party. I deliberately keep myself from membership in one party or another so that I don't find myself being trapped into my party right or wrong. And so I'm free to choose from whichever candidate based on which candidate says the things that I feel are most important in our world today. And sometimes we have to make choices between those two. When that happens, the church reminds us that we have to clarify those teachings and say, well, which ones are more important and which candidate for whatever office it is espouses more of what we find is most important. And there are many important issues out there that we certainly look at. Certainly the economy and the environment and rights of immigrants and all the other things we have out there. They're all very important issues that we have to take seriously. But the American bishops and the Pope himself have always reminded us consistently that the single most important issue before us today in the United States is legalized abortion. The fact that in 1973 the court legalized killing an unborn child simply because the mother finds it an inconvenience. And that is a far greater horror than anything else out there, and that is a greater concern. And sometimes people, in talking about that, when we talk about being pro-life and say, hey, this person's pro-life because he's in favor of, he's against abortion, and therefore we should be in line with that person. Once in a while, somebody will come up and say, well, yeah, Father, that guy is pro-life, but when it comes to the death penalty, he's also in favor of the death penalty, and the church is against the death penalty. Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. That is the case. The church is against the death penalty, and it would be wonderful if we had a candidate somewhere that has that consistent life ethic that defends life from natural conception until natural death, including those who are criminal. But the church clearly has reminded us that when we weigh the two of them, abortion is a far more serious issue than the death penalty. Because when you face it, how many people are put to death by the death penalty every year? Very, very few. And before somebody goes to capital punishment, they have loads of appeal processes. And there's always a chance that the governor will give them a reprieve, that they'll have another trial or anything. And those people are given every opportunity to try to have another appeal. We lament when ultimately it comes down to the person is put to death, but at least there's been a chance there. But with the child in the womb, there's no appeal. Even the father of the baby doesn't have the right to say, no, I don't want my wife or the mother of my child to have an abortion. There's no appeal to him or to anyone else. And we kill 25%, of the babies that we conceive here in the United States. If people think that abortion is rare, well, guess again. The national rate of abortion is 25%. In other words, we kill 1/4 of all the children that we conceive every year in our country. And they have no appeal. They have no one to speak for them. They only have ourselves. And in some places, such as New York City, the number is even higher, greater than 40%, approaching 50% of pregnancies ending in abortion. Imagine that. We kill nearly 50% of the children we conceive in New York City every year. My friends, if that is not important enough to take seriously, what is? What issue out there is more important than killing nearly half of our children without any opportunity to have an appeal? And unlike the death penalty today, which is done in very humane ways, the abortion process is gruesome and horrible. No, we have a God-given duty to defend human life, most especially the innocent life that cannot speak for itself. And among those, the priority is the unborn child. And Pope Benedict XVI actually even told us, he said that it would be a sin for somebody to vote for a candidate who is pro-abortion when there is a viable substitute or alternative for that. Sometimes we might feel we have no viable alternative. Maybe both candidates for an office are pro-abortion and there's really nothing we can do. But if we come down to one is adamantly pro-abortion and one has restrictions, well then our conscience should tell us that we should favor the one who would give restrictions to abortion. Anything that will help us bring back respect for life in our country. And that is tremendously more important than the economy, than global warming, than immigrant issues, or any of the other things we have. As important as they are, nothing compares with the life of 25% and some places 50% of the lives of our children. When we have a society that cannot respect the life of the unborn, of innocent people who cannot speak for themselves and also don't mean a vote for them, how are we going to respect life for anyone else? It starts with the unborn. And we must have a clear and consistent respect for life from natural conception until natural death. And as we go to the polls in a few weeks, no matter what the level of government we're going to, always look to the politicians who are going to defend life first and foremost. And if we have life candidates, then please vote for them. And if not, if we have to choose the lesser of two evils, well then do that. But do so prayerfully. And please, the biggest danger that we have in our world today is good, faithful, church-going Catholics who just pull the lever for their political party without looking at all of what they stand for, blindly supporting their party and not realizing what that person stands for. And the further we get in time in the United States and the higher of the level of government we get, the higher the stakes become. We are really, and you know very well, you've seen how divided our country is becoming. We need all the more now to put allegiance to God, not to politics, and say, the more that people have tried to remove God from the world, you notice how, for the first time in history in our Western world, the majority of people do not worship any God whatsoever on a weekend, that people are totally irreligious. 75% of Americans do not worship at all every weekend. And the further away from God we get, the worse our world becomes, to the point that we're even now seeing literally people burning down our cities. And the hatred and the vitriol is only growing and getting worse. Why? First of all, respect for human lives. If we don't respect a child in the womb, how are we going to respect a person from another race or a person who disagrees with us? Well, they go hand in hand. And then, of course, which maybe even when we think about it, even the greater issue, is the presence of God completely in our country, where for the first time we're starting to see major political parties actually trying to fight the presence of God and worship of the Lord, and trying to say we have to get beyond God and instead get to a society that is not God-based. And when a society is not God-based, but based on the power of the people, that's what we call socialism. And the church has clearly defined that socialism is wrong, and every socialist country ultimately falls apart, because we cannot have a society without the law of God. And so looking again to the First Amendment and saying which of the candidates on any level will defend the right of God, the right to our freedom of religion, the right for us to practice as the Constitution has told us we can have, and that will restore God to his rightful place of primacy in our hearts and primacy of our nation. Which of the candidates will help us again, indeed, become one nation under God? And so there is a lot at stake here. I'm not telling you whom to vote for. I cannot do that. But I am asking you to be prayerful about people on any level. Number one, vote. And make sure before you go to the polls you have looked at the candidates and seen where they really stand, and not just vote for the candidate of your party just because he is of your party. But always remember to put God first. Yes, we must render to Caesar what is Caesar's, but we have a higher obligation to render to God what is God's. May Jesus Christ be praised, now and forever.